This is Brad Putt. Today I'd like to talk to you about retirement planning. Well, I'm not a certified financial planner, but I certainly spend a lot of time planning my own retirement, and I thought I would share that with you, not my numbers, but at least the process that I went through that a good financial planner should do, and most do not. So the purpose of this retirement planning model is to consider various aspects of life and then manage the controls that the retiree has to achieve their objectives. And these objectives are going to be different for every individual. So I don't have in the model a single metric to measure goodness. Some of the metrics or some of the things that you want to consider in your retirement are what might be important to you is not having sufficient money to live comfortably. That's probably number one. And find out when you're going to run out of money. When does the portfolio drop below the initial value? Because you're thinking here, I'm going to retire in my 60s. I could live to be 90, and therefore I need to have, 25, 30 years for this portfolio to last. So I want to keep it kind of at the same value as when I retired. Or maybe you're concerned about not leaving a sufficient legacy to your children. Maybe that's important. So I'm not going to help you on those. Those are things you're going to have to think through. But the model certainly can provide inputs on all of those and help you make a decision. So I happen to have this graphic from Vanguard that seemed to suggest, as many financial planners do, that the closer you get to retirement, over here, you reduce your stock allocations and you increase your bond allocations. I'm not so sure that that's the right answer. It depends upon your value measures, I guess. But oftentimes what can happen is by increasing the number of bonds, you're also reducing your return on your portfolio or likely return because historically stocks have had a higher return than bonds. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. The model will provide some awareness or insights as to how this split between bonds and stocks works. It's not designed to pick a portfolio of specific stocks or particular mutual funds or ETFs. That's not the purpose. It's going to have it's going to have this rough split between average bonds and average stocks. So the issue that most families have is they do not have enough savings. So this is showing the median net worth of Americans in dollars. At 65 or over, they're saying the median, which means there's 50% more and 50% greater than this by population, have $170,000 of median net worth. However, if you exclude their home, they only have $27,000. There was an article on the radio recently that suggested that many Americans are planning on Social Security as their only source of income. And I'll suggest to you that that's not going to work. So a lot of people are going to be working after they retire. So in the model, we define starting balances. And I've broken out the assets into your after-tax account, which I've assumed there's $100,000. And then I've broken it out into a husband and wife having IRAs and Roths. You don't have to use them all. Here, if I only use the after-tax account. And then you can say how that money is invested. Remember, we're only going to talk about stocks and bonds. So I've said that 60% is in stocks in the after-tax account and 100% in the IRA and the Roths. That's where you might want to have your highest risk because you don't have to pay any taxes on those, at least right away. It's important to understand what was the basis for the stock growth and the bond growth. So what I did is I found some historical data going back to 2004, and I've shown here the percentage change year on year. What I did was actually use monthly data, and this excludes dividends. And then I resampled this data for a total of 10 years, I think it is. Yeah, 10 years. Well, actually, I think we went more than that, but I took a 10-year average. And so this is inherent within the retirement model. So this is the growth rate for stocks and bonds over on this chart. This shows the cumulative distribution for the stock growth averaged over a 10-year period. And what we find is that the expected value shown here is 7.6%. Now, there's an uncertainty in the stock growth, and it could be as high as, let's call that like 14%. There's a 90% chance it'll be less than that number, and only a 10% chance is higher than that. Similarly, on the low side, there's only a 10% chance that it'll be less than just slightly above zero, okay? And a 9% chance that it will be above zero. Similar kind of arguments for the bonds, but you can see that the bonds have much less uncertainty, and the expected value shown here in the diamond is effectively zero. Now that's the stocks and bonds without dividends. If I look at the dividend side, as might be expected, the dividends have a much higher yield. They're yielding 2.8%, whereas the stocks are only delivering 1.5. So that's why an investment advisor might suggest, oh, you need to go into bonds to get the income. But in doing so, you're giving up the growth over here. Now in the model, you need to define what you need for living expenses. Let me make sure we're clear on the living expenses. Living expenses include the food, your home expenses, your Medicare. Some of you may be surprised at the Medicare costs when you retire. You may have memberships in clubs of various, you have vacations, donations that you typically do. All those things are included in your living expenses. We're not going to consider life insurance in this model. That's a personal decision you'll have to make. And some of you may have it. We're also not going to include in your living expenses income taxes. However, income taxes, federal only, are calculated in the model based on the U.S. 2018 tax rules, roughly, at least the tax rates, and assume standard deductions, $24,000. Now in the model we have sources of income. We have other income, which would be taxable. So if I continue to work after I retire, or at some point, or maybe it's your existing income, which you can assume grows. You may have some other income that's non-taxable, and then there'll be withdrawals from the after-tax account, help to make up those living expenses. RMDs that you may need to take from your IRA are assumed deposited in the after-tax account, and then those monies are used for living expenses as a withdrawal from the after-tax account. In the model, you may have the pension from the retiree, supplemental income by continuing to work for $30,000. I think I actually used $60,000 for 10 years. You have Social Security at $18,000 per year for the wife and $42,000 for the husband. You may have a trust income, maybe from a parent, and the model does not include any reverse mortgage capability, although that's been suggested as something that people might want to consider. So in this deterministic case, and remember this is going to be one deterministic case out of 1,000 simulations that we'll use in the model, we've assumed that the husband is age 50 and lives to 80. The wife's a couple of years younger and lives to also 80. They have combined income of $60,000 that I already mentioned, and each takes Social Security at age 66. They estimate their living expenses as $60,000, and they want to make sure that they save a total of $4,000 to IRA and Roth, and it's split between the two until for a while, for a number of years. And then 60% of their assets are in the stock. And so you can see what happens is here we are in 2018. Their after-tax account is growing. They've started to put some money into their Roths and IRAs. Remember, we started off at zero. So those are building up here. And so when you put the whole model together, you now ask, what is my total assets? We started off here at $10,000, and their total assets grow along this purple line as an expected value, And here's where they're going to pass here. The P90 outcome is they could have almost $2 million, or they could have only $500,000, in 2047. But now living expenses are what matter. So we said they wanted to have $60,000. However, in the model, they can only take up to 4% out of their after-tax account. That's a variable that you can change, but that's the general rule of thumb in retirement, that you don't want to take more than 4% out of your after-tax accounts for your living expenses. And by the time I pay taxes, I can't actually achieve $60,000. I'm down here closer to $50,000. And as you can see, I stay under my desired income, my expenses, for quite a while. And then over here, there's a gap between the full retirement age and when both partners start to receive Social Security. So this may be a reason why you want to work until age 66, until you can get your full Social Security payments. And then with Social Security, they can, and then pulling out money from the IRA, they can achieve their desired living expenses. So in 2032, and let me point out that 2032 is just before this drop, so it's right here, okay? In 2032, there's only about a 15% chance that they'll actually achieve their target living expenses. The rest of the time, they're going to be less. And remember, this target living expense here is not $60,000 anymore because it's grown with the CPI, which I've assumed to be 2%. And so what is the living expense shortfall in 2033 and 2034? That's that little dip that I showed you previously. The shortfall in 2033 is, on average, $6,700 too little per year. But by 2034, that's grown to $23,000 less. Now, the good side of all this, they've had to live on the cheap, and they had hamburgers rather than steaks, and they have been able to accumulate a large amount of money for their heirs, their children, or for donations. And so they could have as little as a little less than $500,000, or they could, in some cases, have more than $4 million. So that's the good side of it. So in the model, we can control the amount that we invest. We can also, between stocks and bonds, the model will rebalance, which is a common portfolio management tools, when we can specify the minimum stocks we want and the maximum stocks we want. In the next video, I will go through all that, and we'll kind of test it on a real live model and see what we can do to improve the retirement plan of this couple. So I hope you'll watch video number 2. Thanks.